It's a summit meant to increase cooperation between Gulf countries, but it comes at a time of sweeping changes and rising tensions in the region. Just how nervous are GCC countries about these changes? And are they really immune to the so-called Arab Spring? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. The Gulf Cooperation Council has held its annual summit in Bahrain. There were a few leaders missing, but nevertheless the Council went ahead to talk about greater economic and security cooperation. But how much of what they discussed will end in action? And is the Council just a talking shop, as many claim? The host, Bahrain's King Hamad, called for a security umbrella to protect all the citizens of the GCC. The leaders met at a time of uncertainty in the region, following sweeping political changes across the Middle East and poor relations with Iran over its nuclear program. Well, Gulf countries were caught on the back foot by the wave of uprisings that swept through the Middle East. Let's take a look now at how the Council reacted to these seismic upheavals of the last 2 years. Most Gulf countries were particularly troubled by the revolution in Egypt. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah expressed support for longtime ally Hosni Mubarak and denounced the people who, to quote, were destabilising Egypt. When protests became violent in Bahrain, the GCC sent troops to suppress the unrest and presented the move as an act of defence against so-called external threats. GCC countries have also sought to shield other Arab monarchies like Jordan and Morocco from popular unrest. Both countries were formally invited to join the GCC and offered financial aid. In Yemen, a Saudi-brokered transition saw Ali Abdullah Saleh leave power, but many say the old regime remains largely intact. And in Syria, Gulf countries continue to offer material support for opposition forces trying to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. So, are GCC ready for new realities in the region? To help answer that question and more, we're joined by our guests from London. We're joined by Saeed Al-Shehabi, a member of the Bahrain Freedom Movement and a political activist who was sentenced to life imprisonment by the Bahraini government. From Dubai, Riad Kahwaji, director of the Institute for Near East and Gulf Military Analysis. And from Beirut, Joseph Kechichian, Gulf News columnist and author of the Beguiling Gulf Cooperation Council and his newly released book entitled Legal and Political Reforms in Saudi Arabia. So let's open with Saeed Al-Shehabi. Saeed, let's go right back to basics about the Council. Formed in 1981, what was the purpose they had in mind? What's the reason for the Gulf Cooperation Council?
Thank you very much, and I wish you and those of the audience and participants a Merry Christmas, a happy time at this time of the year. When I think the circumstances that had led to the creation and the formation of the GCC in 1981 are very much the same as they are today, because at the time there was the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the fears that that revolution may spill over into the Arab region. And of course the members of the Gulf Sheikdoms there, they thought that they could be threatened by this wave of revolution. So it was principally a security arrangement at the time to fend off any threat of revolutionary spillover from the neighboring Iran. It is similar today, where the Arab revolutions have taken place and where the threats of change are still there. So I think after 30 years, we have to look back and see whether these measures to fend off revolutions and tides of change can be eliminated altogether, or can they only be minimized?
Okay, well, that's a good opening salvo. Joseph Kechichian, a Gulf Council which has ploughed through 33 sessions, as you were writing about today. Would you describe it as a relevant organisation?
I'm afraid that the GCC has really lost its relevance for many of the member states. Obviously, as we just heard, in 1981, when the organization was created, there was the perception that Iran was such an overwhelming threat and that the spillover effects of the revolution would engulf the entire region. And the reaction was to form this alliance, but unfortunately, the alliance has not been able to get its own act together and repeatedly postpone the key decisions on both security matters as well as economic issues. However, that is not to say that they haven't done a lot of things. Certainly, they have done a lot of very important initiatives, some of which we have not seen in public, behind the scenes, intelligence gathering, sharing of information, and so on. But overwhelmingly, I think that they have really lost the relevance that they themselves set out to achieve.
Riad Kahwaji lost the relevance they set out to achieve. The council represents less than 50 million people. That isn't a significant number in global terms. So does it have any strength?
I would not say lost its relevance. It is still very relevant. I think today, in light of all the turbulences that sweeping the region, the continued perceived threat from Iran, it's still very much relevant. These states do believe that they need each other to confront all these challenges. It has been disappointing to many people, especially the public, had much higher expectations that this GCC was actually going to achieve more than it already achieved so far. They have achieved some limited cooperation on defense security levels, cooperation on internal security side and so forth. We've seen now some progress on joint missile defense initiatives and so forth. There are some progress on some fronts, but still, if we measure the expectations of the public over the past few years, we see that the leadership is still lagging behind the public expectation as to where they would like to see this union.
Well, this year, I work out the 4 of the 6 heads of state won't be at that meeting. Let's go to Saeed. Saeed, you heard their defence of the council. I wonder how often the national agenda of the GCC country will take precedence over the joint agenda, the council agenda.
It is clear that there have been differences in local agendas, whereas, for example, Kuwait has a limited degree of democratic process. You have other countries like Saudi Arabia, which does not believe in any sort of representation. While, for example, we saw that the Sultanate of Oman had undertaken last year some measures to stem off the local revolts and protest. Bahrain has done nothing in that respect in political terms. So there are other problems, but also they have the bilateral relations that have not really been very flowery. The relations between the Emirates and Saudi Arabia is still tense. The absence of four of the 6 leaders from the Manama summit is something that has come at a time when Bahrain needed to show that the GCC is standing with it as the local eruptions of protests continue. But yet they have not been able to come either for health reasons or for political reasons. So all in all, the local agendas have always dominated the preferences of those countries. But of course, at the same time, they believe that the joint action would help them, as has happened in Bahrain when the GCC, or at least Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, dispatched some forces to crush the rebellion, although it is still there.
I want to come on to Bahrain and the security agenda in a moment. Before I do that, just one last thought, Joseph Kechichian. I talked about 48 million people. In fact, the real figure is about 24 million people if you take expats out of the figure. How representative of that? How much voice does that give to the council? How allowed can it be when they're only representing just over 20 million people?
Well, I think this is a key question. I think Riyadh hinted to it, the fact that the populations of the GCC countries are way ahead of the leadership in this respect. The expectations may have been very high, but even on the key security matters, there has not been a great deal of agreement, really. I mean, there is the Peninsula Shield Force that has been created in the mid-1990s, and it seems that the Dar al-Jazeera, the Peninsula Shield Force, that did not see any action in, or very light action during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Obviously, there was an effort to increase the numbers to about 100,000 as the Omanis proposed, but this could not go any further. And one of the reasons why there is this irrelevance that I've mentioned at the beginning is because on the key security measures, which after all are really the reason for which the GCC was created, on this key issue, they could not even agree to beef up the Peninsula Shield Force to something that will really deter potential foes of ever trying to get anything done. Therefore, the perceptions of the people are, I don't want to say the perceptions are irrelevant, but the perceptions of people are that their leaders are way behind the scale and that they are not really keeping up with the challenges that these societies are facing. It is essentially a photo opportunity affair at this time.
Riad Kahwaji, the council a bit out of touch, a bit behind current thinking. And talk about that, but also I want to move on to what would be top of the agenda. I take it would be security at this council meeting.
It is a security pact, to start with. So always, we have the security factor that dominates the discussions. In addition to some economic issues like, the tariffs and issue of a joint currency that's been going on for a long debate. The main issue with the GCC is that you have one giant country, Saudi Arabia, and you have a small princedoms around it that are worried of being swallowed by their giant brother. And now with the Saudis pushing for the agenda of unification, the issue of going further towards unification, this is scaring some of the members. We heard Oman bluntly say, no, we're not going to go for unification. Another member, Bahrain, embracing unification, while the three other members are a bit hesitant to talk about it. So we still see on the part of leadership a lack of joint vision on the leadership, or where do they want to see the GCC headed?
Saeed Al-Shehabi, in a council dominated by Saudi Arabia, does that mean it's more or less likely that the unrest in Bahrain will be discussed and some solution found? Indeed, some of the reported unrest inside Saudi Arabia as well.
Well, it is clear that the intervention by the GCC, or by the Saudi and the Emirates forces, mainly actually Saudi rather than the Emirates forces, has not really led to the crushing and obliteration of the revolution. It is still there. Whether it will be discussed or not, I am sure it will be discussed, but it will be discussed probably mostly by the foreign ministers rather than the two sheikhs, because they do not see eye to eye. The King of Bahrain and the Sheikh of Kuwait, they do not see eye to eye, even in relation to the problems of Bahrain. So I think Bahrain problem has, instead of being demolished by the Saudi intervention, has in fact spread all over the place. You see some problems in Saudi Arabia, almost daily demonstrations in Qasim, in Riyadh, in Jeddah by the families of the prisoners. And also you have it in Kuwait. You had some arrested in the United Arab Emirates, more than 65 of them. So it is there. The question of political change is still an issue to the GCC. Whether the leaders want to discuss that or not is up to them. But if they don't, they may be too late to save their own thrones.
All right, well, I'll come to Joseph in a moment, but first I want to sort of talk about what many see in the Gulf Cooperation Council as a main threat, and that's the threat from Iran, which has been a recurring theme, as Joseph pointed out earlier, for GCC countries. Gulf leaders are particularly nervous about the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran. They say that could trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, and they've also warned of Iranian interference in the internal affairs of their own countries. So, Joseph, is this the sort of place, is this the sort of council, the talking shop, that could help broker some kind of rapprochement or some kind of solution to what is perceived as the main threat to the council?
It has been tried time and time again. The GCC has, during the past 30 years, made repeated efforts to essentially thaw the very tough relations that existed between them and Iran after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But repeatedly, for revolutionary reasons that can only be explained in the context of Iranian foreign policy, that kind of thawing process never really occurred and it never matured. This is the reason why Prince Saeed Al-Faisal, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, a couple of days ago essentially had some very strong words against Iran, warning them not to interfere in the internal affairs of the Gulf countries, in particular in the Arab world in general. So therefore, although this has been tried a number of times, the GCC has found the Iranian relationship to be very difficult, and a nuclear Iran, at the end of the day, is a real threat for the GCC leaderships and GCC populations. Okay. Therefore, I think that we're going to see continued clash on this level. Whether or not the GCC countries are able to respond is something entirely different. And alone, unfortunately, they're not able to respond to the Iranian threat. That's why they need the cooperation of the Western powers that stand behind them.
And Riad Kahwaji, in terms of the Arab Spring, or do you think, does the Council welcome the uprisings, or did the GCC feel, shall we say, uncomfortable with the instability it produced?
No, I believe that the GCC is very uncomfortable with the instability produced by the Arab Spring, especially with the coming of the Brotherhood to power in many parts of the countries that witnessed the Arab Spring. We've heard many Arab officials, many GCC officials openly and strongly criticize the Brotherhood, accuse them of tampering with the internal affairs of GCC, of being a threat to the stability of the region. We've had even some GCC officials compare the Brotherhood threat to that of Iran. So for them, the Arab Spring is a real cause of concern and has only added to the anxiety which they already have because of Iran.
Saeed Al-Shehabi, do you agree that they are very worried, very concerned about the Arab Spring in the Council?
Very much so. I agree with my colleague from UAE. It is clear that the GCC leaders are very uneasy about what's going on, especially as my colleague also said about the Muslim Brotherhood taking offices in several Arab countries, but also they are more worried about Bahrain. But in this latest communique that has been issued today, they criticized Iran and they asked it not to intervene, but at the same time they called for support of the revolution and the movement in Syria. So they themselves are not clear on what they want to see, whether they want to see changes in other countries or not. And if there is a change in Syria, then definitely there should be a change, and there would be a change in Bahrain, and then ultimately the other countries of the GCC may also be affected. So I think there is a problem, an internal problem on perception and where to go from here, where they cannot just continue their policy, which is sometimes clashing with each other. But at the same time, they should also ensure that their population really do accept what at least some changes in their leadership, which has not been forthcoming so far.
Joseph Kechichian, in the past 2 years, the GCC has helped broker a political transition in Yemen. It's deployed security forces in Bahrain, and it's agreed to deeper cooperation to what it perceives as shared threats. But it doesn't seem to have talked a lot about the Arab Spring, publicly anyway. Why do you think that is?
Well, because they don't want the spillover effects of the Arab Spring at home, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Oman, in Qatar, and of course in Bahrain, we are seeing serious problems, and in Kuwait. Obviously, the spillover challenges are real, and they are very much concerned about internal stability as well. Now, in 1981, when the GCC was created as an alliance, obviously regional security was a primary concern. But one of the very interesting steps that were taken at the time was the creation of an internal security accord, the so-called ISA, that has really kind of been kept quiet and developed very easily throughout the years. But that's also something that has been on their minds all this time. The Arab Spring, unfortunately, is real. It's not going to go away, whether it's in Syria, in Yemen, or anywhere else for that matter. They're concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, but they're concerned about the kind of violence that is going on in Syria as we speak. But they're also concerned about the potential Turkish-Iranian clashes over the fate of the Arab world. So therefore, they face a dilemma. The GCC leaders face a dilemma. How to preserve internal security while making sure that regional threats are kept at a safe distance. That's a big challenge that they face.
Riad Kahwaji, Kuwait is saying there has to be what it's describing as greater cooperation between the countries that make up the GCC. So why isn't the Council unanimous even on that issue about a greater, a tighter level of cooperation between these 6 countries? It's not a lot to ask, is it?
No, it's not a lot to ask. You know, there's the issue here is that
the issue is cooperation, isn't it?
They don't. Yeah, I mean the issue here we have between the leaders themselves. There is difference in the vision. What is the reality? What should be the top priority for? The top priority for each one to start with. The Saudi has one priority, the Emiratis have different one, the Kuwaitis have a different one, and this is here where you have the differences. This is where they try to come together. Saudi Arabia today is pushing towards the issue of unification. They see it as a priority to help preserve the monarchy in Bahrain. They see it as the best way to go about it.
Right.
While others perceive issue, for example, let's go for missile defense. Let's consolidate against the main threat coming from Iran.
Different issues for national agendas. But finally, briefly, Saeed, just to you, I wonder if there's a 2-track council, whether or not some countries do want to move faster than others, and briefly, if you will.
Well, I'm not sure whether there is this 2-track process, but it seems to me that definitely some of the countries are unlikely to develop, especially the monarchy in Saudi Arabia and in Bahrain are unlikely to develop their own system. The rest may have some degree of maneuverability and wish to force a little bit of change. But these 2 countries are unlikely to develop themselves because they think that if they develop little bit, then their regimes may go altogether.
All right, Saeed, thank you very much. Little seems to have changed on the Council agenda in the past 3 decades, but when each state, Gulf state that is, focuses more on perhaps its national priorities than on a regional joint outcome, then that will be the future picture too. Thanks to all my guests from London, Saeed Al-Shehabi, from Dubai, Riad Kahwaji, and from Beirut, Joseph Kechichian. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching from me, Stephen Cole. Compliments of the season, and goodbye for now.